There are stories so old that even the Force seems to whisper them with hesitation. Tales from before the Republic, before the Jedi, before even memory itself had shape. In that silence, before light and dark were named, there were the ones who listened. They were not conquerors, not prophets, but vessels. Beings whose lives were woven with the pulse of the galaxy itself. Among them, one would emerge to change the fate of all things. His name would be Yoda. But to understand him, we must begin long before his birth, in the lost ages of his kind. In the beginning, the galaxy was still young. The stars were raw, burning with restless creation. Great civilizations rose and fell before the Republic's first charter was ever written. The Rakata Empire stretched its cruel hand across the stars, enslaving worlds and feeding on the very essence of the Force. Yet even they spoke of a small, elusive species that existed beyond their grasp, beings who vanished whenever darkness drew near. Some said they dwelled within the oldest forests of the deep core. Others claimed they were guardians of the Force itself, protectors of its balance when neither side yet ruled. The truth was quieter. Yoda's people had no name they shared with the galaxy. They lived in silence and symbiosis, their lives attuned to every tremor in the living Force. Where other species saw power as a tool, they felt it as breath, the rise and fall of existence itself. Their world was lush, hidden beneath storms of cosmic radiation that concealed it from explorers and invaders alike. Great canopies of blue-leaf trees stretched into the mist, glowing softly with bioluminescent moss that pulsed like the heartbeat of the planet. The air itself hummed with the song of life and decay, the two halves of the Force in perfect harmony. On that sacred world, birth was not just a beginning, it was a continuation. Children were said to be fragments of the Force made flesh, born already sensitive to its ebb and flow. Their elders did not teach them to control it, but to listen, to hear the symphony beneath existence. It was a way of life that bred serenity, patience, and a depth of understanding few could imagine. And yet, hidden beneath this peace was the faint awareness that their gift made them vulnerable. For every age of light gives rise to an age of hunger. When outsiders came, ancient explorers seeking knowledge, perhaps even immortality, they found nothing. The world concealed itself, its forests shifting as though the planet itself refused to be known. And when the explorers vanished, no trace remained. Over centuries, Yoda's species became myth. To the Jedi archivists of later millennia, they were little more than a whisper, a curiosity in old texts, marked species unknown. Their disappearance was not extinction, but choice. They understood what others could not, that to survive the corruption of power, one must sometimes retreat from the light. It was into this sanctuary of secrecy that a child was born. Small, green, and fragile in appearance, yet with eyes that reflected stars far older than his world. His birth was accompanied by a trembling in the Force, subtle but profound. The elders felt it at once. The balance had shifted, as though the living Force itself had chosen to breathe more deeply through this new life. They named him not in words, but in feeling, a vibration carried on the wind. He was destiny in miniature, the galaxy's future folded into a single heartbeat. From his earliest years, the child wandered far beyond the safe boundaries of his kin. Where others meditated in stillness, he sought communion through curiosity. He watched the creatures of the swamps, the cycles of birth and decay, and saw not tragedy, but unity. Death was never an end, it was the Force feeding itself, life returning to the source. That understanding would one day define him, and torment him. Yet not all was harmony. Deep within his world, the Force sometimes shivered with sorrow. Strange rifts of energy rippled through the wetlands, echoes of the galaxy's growing imbalance. Somewhere, far away, civilizations rose in arrogance, bending the Force to their will. The elders whispered of a great tide that would soon sweep across the stars, and that even their hidden world might one day feel its pull. For the first time, fear touched their people, not of death, but of destiny. As Yoda matured, he began to sense this call beyond the forests, a beckoning from the wider galaxy. It came to him in dreams of stars dying and being reborn, of voices crying out from distant worlds. He understood, even then, that the balance of the Force could not be maintained through isolation. But to leave was to risk everything. His people had survived precisely because they did not interfere. The choice between safety and service would define the path he had yet to walk. In the fading twilight of his youth, a visitor arrived, not of flesh, but of the Force itself. A presence vast and ancient, neither light nor dark. It spoke without words, showing him visions of a galaxy in turmoil, of the Force divided by the greed of sentient beings. He saw wars fought in the name of peace, empires rising in the name of order. And he saw himself, standing small amidst giants, holding nothing but wisdom, and yet shaping everything. When he awoke, the meaning was clear. His path would lead him away from home. When he departed, his people gathered in silence. No farewell was spoken. Such things belong to the lesser currents of emotion. They understood that this child would carry their way of seeing into the stars, the knowledge that power must serve life, not consume it. As his small craft lifted through the mists, the planet itself seemed to close around him, withdrawing once more into myth. It would never be found again, not by Yoda, nor by any who sought it. The galaxy would know only fragments, the mystery of a being whose age and wisdom defied comprehension. Centuries would pass before historians even whispered of his origins. The Jedi Order would rise and fall upon foundations Yoda helped shape, yet the truth of where he came from would remain hidden, protected by the same silence that birthed him. For the galaxy does not remember the quiet worlds that preserve its balance. It remembers only the wars that threaten to destroy it. And so the story begins, not with conquest or prophecy, but with a child of stillness, born in the heart of obscurity. From the forgotten corners of the galaxy, he would walk into legend, carrying with him the last echo of a civilization that chose peace over presence. Before the light, there was listening. Before the Jedi, there was Yoda's people. And in their silence, the Force first learned to speak. In every age, there are students who learn by listening, and others who learn by questioning. Yoda was both. When he first arrived among the Jedi, he was not yet the legend the galaxy would one day revere. He was small, unremarkable, a figure of quiet curiosity amid beings who towered above him in both stature and pride. Yet even then, there was something unsettling in his stillness, an awareness that went beyond training, beyond sight. It was as if the Force itself lingered near him, watching. The Jedi Order he joined was ancient, though not yet wise. It had already grown vast, its academies spanning from Coruscant to Ossus, its doctrines calcified by centuries of repetition. The Jedi had become interpreters of the Force rather than its students, translating its mysteries into rules, codes, and rigid hierarchies. They served peace, yes, but also structure. And in their endless pursuit of clarity, they had begun to fear the unknown. To them, Yoda was a curiosity, a being whose presence disrupted their certainty. His early days as an initiate were marked by silence. While other students trained in lightsaber drills or debated the philosophies of the Masters, Yoda would sit alone, listening to the pulse beneath the stone floors of the temple. He would close his eyes and feel the hum of distant life, the breath of a star dying, the whisper of wind across a forgotten moon. His teachers mistook it for idleness, but it was meditation in its truest form. For Yoda, the Force was not something to be commanded, it was something to be understood. Yet understanding, he soon learned, could be dangerous. The Jedi valued detachment, but Yoda saw emotion not as a weakness, but as a mirror. Fear, love, sorrow, all were ripples in the great current of the Force. To deny them was to deny the truth of being alive. This idea, radical for its time, began to trouble his mentors. They feared his insights might lead others astray, that compassion could blur the sacred boundary between light and dark. Yoda listened to their warnings with respect, but deep within, a question began to take root. If balance is the goal, why fear the shadow? Years passed, and with them came trial. The Order, stretched thin across the expanding Republic, sent its younglings into the far reaches of space to assist in disputes and meditations. Yoda was dispatched to a border world consumed by famine and civil strife. There, for the first time, he saw the cost of the Jedi's philosophy of distance. Entire villages starved while the Order debated neutrality. Yoda did what he could, healing the wounded, calming the despairing. Yet each act drew him closer to compassion, and further from the cold perfection the Masters expected. In the stillness of night, he would meditate under alien stars and feel the pain of the dying as if it were his own. It was then he discovered a truth few Jedi dared to admit, that the Force did not distinguish between joy and agony. Both were part of its rhythm. Life thrived through suffering as much as serenity. This revelation shook him. It was beautiful, and terrifying. For if pain was sacred, then so too was the darkness that caused it. Upon his return to the temple, Yoda's instructors tested him. They sought to measure his strength through lightsaber form and telekinetic precision, the familiar displays of mastery. He performed them all with quiet excellence, but when asked what he had learned, he spoke not of control, but of surrender. To command the Force is to silence it, he said softly. To listen is to let it speak through you. The council chambers fell into uneasy silence. For the first time, Yoda's wisdom sounded like heresy. Yet one master, ancient, cloaked in humility, saw promise where others saw risk. He took Yoda as his apprentice, guiding him not through commands but through questions. You seek to understand the Force, the old master said, but have you asked if the Force wishes to be understood? Together they journeyed beyond the temple walls, into the wilds of unknown worlds where the Force thrived unbounded by doctrine. There, Yoda learned through living, through storms and silence, through creatures that fed on fear, and spirits that whispered truths no council could teach. Under his master's watch, Yoda confronted his greatest paradox, that the more he tried to know the Force, the more it eluded him. It was like water, cupped too tightly, it slipped away. So he began to let go. He stopped seeking meaning in every vision and instead allowed the visions to pass through him. He stopped fighting his own uncertainty and began to see it as part of the lesson. The galaxy, he realized, was not meant to be tamed. It was meant to be trusted. One night, while meditating beneath the twin moons of a forgotten planet, Yoda felt something stir. The living force around him pulsed with an ancient rhythm, neither light nor dark, simply is. He sensed his own heartbeat slow to match it, his breath dissolving into the world's breath. For a fleeting moment, the barrier between self and creation vanished. He was not a student, nor a being, nor even Yoda. He was the Force, aware of itself. When he opened his eyes, the world was changed, though nothing around him had moved. He returned to the Jedi Temple transformed. The other initiates sensed it, though they could not name what had shifted. His laughter came easier, his wisdom deeper, his humility almost disarming. He no longer sought to prove himself, not to the masters, not even to the Force. And that very humility made him powerful. For those who need no recognition, often the ones the Force chooses to elevate. Still, the flicker of ambition lingered. Not for titles or praise, but for understanding. He longed to grasp the whole, to know why suffering existed at all, why the Force permitted war and loss. These questions would haunt him for centuries, guiding every choice he made, every failure he endured. It was this hunger for meaning, this quiet defiance of simple answers, that would one day make him both the galaxy's greatest teacher and its most tragic sage. In the archives of Coruscant, few records remain of Yoda's early years. The pages are sparse, the details blurred by time. But between those empty lines lies the shape of a truth larger than words, that wisdom begins not in mastery, but in doubt. Yoda's journey from student to master was never about learning to control the Force. It was about learning to trust it, even when it led him into darkness. The paradox that defined him had already taken root, that only by surrendering control can one ever truly hold it. And so the novice became the seeker, a student not of power, but of balance. In him, the Force had found something rare, a being willing to question even the light itself. The galaxy did not yet know his name, but destiny was already listening. Peace, when it first arrives, feels like sunlight after centuries of storm. But even sunlight casts shadows. As the galaxy emerged from the chaos of ancient wars, the first great republic rose, a fragile alliance of countless systems bound not by power, but by hope. It was an age of rebuilding, of forging order from the ashes of tyranny. And standing quietly at its edge was Yoda, now no longer a student but a Jedi whose calm presence had begun to ripple across the stars. He had mastered the art of restraint, yet within him, the same question still lingered. Can peace built upon ambition ever last? The Jedi Order had grown alongside the Republic, becoming both guardian and conscience of the new galactic dream. They served as diplomats, peacekeepers, and mediators, not rulers, but voices of the Force in a political age. Yet their growing influence brought new temptations. The Senate saw them as instruments of unity. Worlds saw them as arbiters of morality. The Jedi had become indispensable, and dependency, Yoda knew, was the first seed of corruption. In those days, Yoda traveled far beyond Coruscant's shimmering spires. He wandered the barren moons of the Mid-Rim, the turbulent worlds of the Outer Rim, the forgotten corners where the Republic's promises had not yet reached. Everywhere he went, he carried not armies, but wisdom. He listened to the pain of miners trapped in endless labor, to farmers who feared their planet would never see peace. And wherever he went, the Force followed, subtle, invisible, but felt. He never spoke of power. Instead, he spoke of balance. To those who sought justice through vengeance, He reminded them that light without compassion becomes as cruel as darkness. To those who despaired, he spoke of the Force as a river, forever moving, forever renewing. Slowly, his presence began to change the Order itself. Young Jedi looked to him as the embodiment of patience, the calm at the heart of the storm. Yet not all within the Council approved of his growing influence. Some masters whispered that Yoda's methods were too gentle, too uncertain. They wanted clarity, conviction, not philosophy. But Yoda understood something few dared to admit, that the Force itself was never clear. It was mystery incarnate, a paradox that resisted definition. To claim certainty was to invite blindness. Still, the galaxy hungered for heroes, and the Jedi, pressed by expectation, began to drift toward the illusion of absolute good. One mission, above all others, marked Yoda's ascent. A civil war had erupted on a frontier world. Two noble houses locked in a cycle of vengeance that threatened to spill into neighboring systems. The Senate demanded intervention. The Jedi Council sent Yoda alone, expecting him to enforce peace through authority. But when he arrived, he did something no one predicted. He laid down his weapon. He entered the camps of both factions, unarmed and unafraid, and listened. For 3 days he listened, to anger, to grief, to guilt that had no place to go. When the fighting stopped, it was not because he commanded it. It was because he made them remember what it meant to be alive. The warriors who had sworn to kill him instead knelt in silence, realizing that the smallest being among them carried the greatest strength, compassion. It was said that when Yoda left that world, the air itself felt lighter. The war ended not with victory, but with understanding. The Senate hailed it as a triumph of diplomacy, but Yoda saw it differently. It was not triumph. It was grace. From that moment, the Council could no longer deny him. Yoda was elevated to the rank of Master, a title he neither sought nor celebrated. Yet even as he accepted it, a quiet sorrow stirred in him. He felt the Order's pride swelling like a tide. The Republic praised the Jedi as saviors, not servants. And Yoda, wise though he was, could not stop the growing bond between faith and governance. The Jedi had become entwined with politics, and the more they served the Senate, the more their purity faded. Decades passed. The Republic flourished, its hyperlanes connecting billions of lives. Coruscant became a beacon of civilization, its skyline a monument to cooperation and progress. But Yoda felt unease beneath the glitter. He sensed it in the Force, a low vibration, like a distant storm forming beyond the horizon. Peace, he realized, had become an institution. The Jedi, once wanderers of the stars, were now bureaucrats in robes, meditating in marble halls. The Force no longer moved freely through them. It was being channeled, controlled, shaped into doctrine. Yoda tried to warn them. He spoke of humility, of remaining servants to life, not lords of order. The moment we believe we have mastered the Force, he said, we cease to hear it. But wisdom rarely stirs those drunk on certainty. His words were met with polite silence, recorded in archives but not remembered. He continued to teach, to guide, to wander, and in the solitude of meditation, he began to see visions. Shadows in the future. A darkness without face or name, growing stronger in silence. These were not yet the Sith, not yet the enemy the galaxy would one day fear. They were the seeds of imbalance, born from the same pride that now infected both the Republic and the Order. Yoda knew the pattern, light expanding until it collapses under its own brilliance. Every rise carries its fall. Every peace hides its decay. Still, he hoped that this time, the galaxy might choose differently. He continued to serve, even as doubts grew within him. To the galaxy, he was the great teacher, the voice of patience, the sage of the Jedi. But in his quiet moments, Yoda wrestled with the same paradox that had haunted him since youth. Can wisdom endure when power becomes its companion? The Republic's golden age was only beginning. But in the Force, Yoda could already hear the echo of its end. Faint, inevitable, and heartbreakingly familiar. He stood at the height of his influence, a pillar of light in a galaxy rebuilding itself from ruin. Yet, beneath that light, the first cracks had begun to form. For even in the dawn, night is always waiting. There are moments in history when greatness begins to turn inward, when the light that once illuminated the galaxy begins to blind those who carry it. This was the age when Yoda's wisdom had become legend, and when that legend became a burden heavier than any saber. The Jedi Order now stood at the center of the Republic, not as wanderers, but as pillars of its civilization. The marble towers of the Jedi Temple gleamed above Coruscant's endless cityscape, a sanctuary of order overlooking the chaos below. Within its silent halls, decisions were made that would shape the fate of star systems. But power, even when wrapped in robes of virtue, carries a quiet danger. And Yoda, now Grand Master, felt its weight more than anyone. He sat upon the council, surrounded by those he had once taught. The chamber was circular. Its symmetry meant to reflect equality and balance. Yet the air inside was heavy with pride. Each master spoke of justice, of duty, of protecting the Republic. But beneath their words, Yoda sensed something colder: fear. Fear of failure. Fear of irrelevance. Fear that peace might one day end. Fear, the very root of the dark side, had found its way into the hearts of the wise. In those years, the Jedi faced not enemies of war, but enemies of spirit. Corruption seeped through the Senate like smoke, invisible, intoxicating, and deadly. Worlds that had once cried for freedom now fought for influence. Senators became merchants of promises, selling ideals for votes and power. And when the Republic faltered, it turned not to its conscience, but to its guardians, the Jedi. Each crisis drew them deeper into politics. Each intervention blurred the line between peacekeeping and control. Yoda watched as the Order became what it once swore never to be, an arm of the state. Jedi diplomacy turned to enforcement. Their sabers, once symbols of defense, now gleamed on battlefields under banners of stability. And Yoda, bound by both duty and doubt, could not stop it. His wisdom guided the council, but wisdom cannot command hearts that seek certainty. He spoke often of humility, that to serve the Force was to surrender to it, but the galaxy no longer wanted surrender. It wanted victory. So Yoda bore his burden in silence. He meditated longer, spoke less. In the solitude of his chambers, he reached into the living Force, searching for clarity. But the visions that came were not of peace. They were of imbalance, spreading like cracks through crystal. Shadows moved behind the Senate's polished walls. Hidden voices whispered in the dark, cloaked in deception. He could not see their faces, but he could feel their hunger, cold, patient, infinite. The Sith, long thought extinct, was stirring once more. Still, the council dismissed such fears. The Sith are gone, they said. Destroyed by our ancestors. The darkness cannot rise again. But Yoda, more than any, knew that darkness never dies. It only waits for light to forget its own frailty. He walked the temple's corridors and looked upon the younglings training with sabers of blue and green, innocent, eager, certain of their place in a just galaxy. He envied their certainty. For all his centuries of wisdom, Yoda had never been further from it. When he taught them, his lessons turned quieter, more inward. A Jedi's greatest battle, he would say, is not with an enemy, but with himself. Many listened. Few understood. For how could they? The galaxy was bright, the Order powerful, the Republic eternal, or so they believed. Yet even among the Jedi, not all followed Yoda's path. There were those who began to question his restraint, masters who believed the Force could be bent, shaped, even weaponized for the greater good. Their intentions were noble, their confidence fatal. Yoda saw in them the same fire that had once consumed the galaxy during the 100-year darkness. He tried to guide them, but influence, once mingled with pride, rarely listens to wisdom. And so, within the heart of the Jedi Temple, a subtle division began to grow, not of allegiance, but of philosophy. One side sought harmony through control, the other through surrender. And between them stood Yoda, the keeper of balance, alone in the middle ground where certainty dies and truth begins. Outside, the Republic flourished, trade routes expanded, new systems joined, and Coruscant's towers reached higher than ever. But peace had become an industry, built upon laws, fleets, and fear. The Jedi were its stewards, and Yoda its symbol, the quiet face of an order that had forgotten its own vulnerability. In public, he remained the embodiment of serenity. But in private, he felt the truth pressing upon him like the weight of a dying star. The Jedi were drifting toward arrogance, and he, their wisest, was powerless to turn the tide. In time, even his closest allies began to falter. One of them, a brilliant master, skilled in the ways of foresight, warned Yoda that the Council's vision was clouded. "We see only what we wish to see," the master said. "The Force itself recoils from us." Soon after, that same master vanished into the outer rim, never to return. Yoda mourned him quietly, fearing what he might have discovered. The whispers of darkness grew louder. Trade wars erupted on distant worlds, and the Senate's greed only deepened the fractures. Jedi missions multiplied, and with each, the Order spread thinner, its connection to the living Force stretched, weakened, strained. Still, the Council claimed control. Still, they believed themselves unshakable. And so, Yoda continued to bear his burden, the burden of wisdom in a time that no longer valued it. He had seen the fall of civilizations, the rise of tyrants, and the illusion of peace too many times to count. He knew what was coming. But even he could not see how close the shadow truly was. For it was no longer waiting beyond the stars. It was already here, inside the walls of the temple, within the hearts of those who had sworn to guard the light. The Council of Shadows had already begun. And though Yoda still sat at its center, surrounded by light, he could feel the darkness gathering just beyond his sight, silent, patient, inevitable.